In 1846, a plantation known as Revolt Estate vanished from every ledger in Montgomery County, Alabama. 51 enslaved souls disappeared overnight. The master, Colonel Abram Vance, was found in his bed, his throat opened from ear to ear. His daughter, Evelyn Vance, was never seen again. For generations, neighbors whispered that Revolt burned from the inside, that the fire wasn't lit by lightning or accident, but by a man named Josiah, a man born in chains who refused to die in them. The official record says Revolt was destroyed by a domestic disturbance. But the truth buried beneath polite Southern silence is something far more dangerous. What happened on that cold January night wasn't madness. It was revolution, planned, deliberate, and righteous. Josiah wasn't a runaway, he was a strategist, a scholar in secret. A man who saw through the illusion of order and decided to rewrite it with blood and fire. Before we unearth what Josiah did, and what Evelyn chose, you must do one thing. If stories like this shake you awake, subscribe now. Turn on the bell so you never miss another truth they tried to erase. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know which corners of the world still listen when forbidden history speaks. And while you're there, write this phrase twice to seal it within you. The fire remembers. Write it once for Josiah and once for yourself. Because Revolt wasn't just a plantation. It was a machine designed to crush souls. Its fields fed the wealth of men who believed they owned the sky itself. Its soil drank the sweat and tears of the enslaved until it tasted like iron and salt. But no machine runs forever. The gears grind down, and the fire that fuels it eventually escapes control. Josiah was that fire. He had been purchased from a Charleston auction at 23, broad-shouldered, silent, his eyes too still for a man who'd been whipped. The bill of sale listed no surname, no origin, no distinguishing marks. But the overseer who led him off the wagon swore he heard Josiah whisper under his breath, "The land keeps score." By the time the sun rose over Revolt that next morning, the soil already knew what that meant. Because the man who killed his master didn't flee, he took control. The night Colonel Abram Vance died, the moon was a thin silver blade, cutting through the fog that rolled across the cotton fields. The house at Revolt stood silent, its white columns gleaming like bones in the dark. Inside, every clock had stopped. Josiah had made sure of that. The timing had to be perfect. Every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat aligned with purpose. He hadn't acted on impulse. He'd planned this moment for over a year, gathering fragments of power the way a storm gathers pressure. A missing nail here, a misplaced key there, a whisper traded for a moment of trust. Even the overseer, drunk on arrogance and whiskey, never saw the pattern forming. Josiah moved through the estate like a ghost that everyone saw, but no one understood. When he slit the colonel's throat, it wasn't rage, it was punctuation. The end of one sentence, the beginning of another. He stood over the body, breathing evenly, listening to the world hold its breath. From the cabins beyond the fields came silence, the kind that knows something sacred and terrible has begun. By dawn, the revolt had already unfolded. The men and women Josiah had taught in secret, those who'd learned to read under candlelight, to count, to listen, to think. Each knew their part. The stables were emptied first, horses untethered, harnesses burned. The storage barns next. All cotton bales were doused in lamp oil, a fortune turning to ash. No screaming, no chaos, only intention. The enslaved moved like soldiers, their rhythm guided by a code that Josiah had written in whispers. No mercy for the lie, no mercy for the chain. Evelyn Vance woke before sunrise, her father's study door open, the air heavy with iron and smoke. She followed the scent of oil through the hall, barefoot, until she saw him, Josiah, standing over the desk, her father's blood drying on his forearms, his eyes calm as still water. He didn't look at her as a slave should. He looked at her as if she were part of the verdict. He said only 3 words, "It has begun." And outside, the first flames rose from the cotton fields like ghosts taking form. Revolt was burning, and every ember carried a message older than America itself. That freedom, once imagined, can never be unlearned. Evelyn Vance did not scream. She did not faint. She stood barefoot in the hallway, her nightdress white against the dark wood, and stared at the man who had killed her father. Every rule she'd ever been taught, the etiquette, the prayers, the manners, fractured in that silence. She should have called for help, should have run to the neighbors, should have watched him hang by sunrise. But when her eyes met Josiah's, something inside her shifted. He was not wild or frantic. He was composed, steady, terrifyingly certain. His gaze held no hatred, only an unbearable kind of clarity. And in that stillness, Evelyn saw not a murderer, but a man who had stepped outside of every law she'd ever known. He was free, even standing in her father's house, covered in her father's blood. "Why?" she whispered. Josiah looked at her the way a prophet might look at someone who asked why the storm comes. "Because he owned men," he said. "And I was done being owned." She trembled. Not in fear, but in awakening. For years she had questioned the world her father built. The auctions, the cries from the quarters, the sermons that praised obedience while baptizing cruelty. But questions were safe in a girl's mind. Answers were not, and now one stood before her. Outside, the plantation pulsed with motion. The others had gathered. The overseer was gone, run off into the woods. The stables and gin house burned in disciplined flames, not wild destruction but rebirth through ash. Josiah stepped past her toward the door. "You can go," he said quietly. "No one will stop you." Oh, she stared after him, her breath caught between disbelief and a dangerous curiosity. "And if I stay?" He turned, his expression unreadable. "Then you'll have to choose what world you belong to." The words struck deeper than any sermon ever had. Behind him, dawn was breaking red over the fields, the smoke turning the sky the color of rust and blood. That morning, Evelyn Vance, daughter of a colonel, heiress to a dynasty of cruelty, walked barefoot into the courtyard of Revolt and faced the people her family had enslaved. No one spoke, but in their silence, she felt the weight of judgment. And beside her, Josiah began to speak, not as a servant, not as a rebel, but as something new, a man building a nation from the ruins of another. The courtyard of Revolt was alive with smoke and breath. 50 men and women stood beneath the rising sun, their faces glowing amber in the firelight. The air smelled of ash and cotton oil, of endings and beginnings braided together. For the first time, no overseer barked orders, no whip cracked through the air. The chains had fallen silent. But freedom, Josiah knew, was not silence, it was speech. He stepped onto the old stone well at the center of the yard, his voice carrying over the low hum of burning wood. "They named us like beasts. They sold us like fruit. But today we name ourselves." The crowd listened, hearts pounding in rhythm with his words. "Every man here has 2 names, the one the slaver gave you, and the one you were born with. Today the old one dies. You will bury it with your fear. When the sun sets, only your true names will remain." A murmur moved through the people. Some wept, some nodded with fierce, quiet resolve. A woman named Leela, who had once been whipped for teaching another to read, stepped forward first. "My name," she said, voice trembling, "is still Leela. But now it means light." The others followed, one by one, naming themselves not as property but as presence: stone, grace, river, dawn. Evelyn stood at the edge, her pale hands clenched in the folds of her nightdress. She didn't speak, didn't move, but every syllable struck her like a hammer breaking old glass. When all had spoken, Josiah raised his hand. "The old law is ash," he said. "We live by a new one. Listen and remember." He recited what would later be whispered as the Code of Revolt, a declaration scrawled in blood and soot. No one owns another. No voice silences another. The weak are protected. The strong are bound by mercy. Fire answers to justice, and justice fears no crown. The people repeated it in unison, the sound swelling until it seemed to shake the air itself. And in that moment, something impossible happened. Evelyn, trembling, whispered the words too. She didn't know what it made her, or what it would cost her. But as the flames devoured her father's house behind her, she realized she was no longer just a witness. She was part of the fire. By nightfall, Revolt was nothing but a blackened skeleton against the horizon. The mansion's great pillars, once symbols of wealth and permanence, now leaned like broken ribs against a bruised sky. But beneath the ruin, in the old wine cellar that had survived the flames, Josiah gathered them all again. The freed stood in a circle lit by oil lamps and trembling shadows. In the center lay a wooden crate, its lid pried off, its contents glinting with steel and memory. The overseer's whips, the shackles, the ledgers that recorded their names, prices, punishments. Every scar had been written there, measured and monetized. Josiah lifted one of the iron shackles, holding it high so the firelight caught it. "This," he said, "was meant to bind us. But tonight, it binds us together." He heated the shackle in the fire until it glowed red, then pressed its edge against his palm. The metal hissed. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. He did not flinch. Blood pooled, dark and steady. "Freedom," he said softly, "isn't a gift. It's a wound we choose to keep open, so we never forget how deep the chains once went." Then, one by one, the others followed. Each cut their palm, letting the blood drip into a shared basin of water. They mixed it with ashes from the burned ledgers. Every drop of pain turned into a vow. Evelyn watched from the corner, pale, shaking, her hair streaked with soot. When Josiah offered her the blade, the room went silent. No one spoke, even the flames seemed to lower their voices. Her eyes met his, steady, questioning, alive with defiance and shame and something neither of them could yet name. She took the blade. For a heartbeat, her hand hovered. Then she sliced her palm and let her blood fall into the basin. A ripple went through the room. Shock, disbelief, awe. Josiah looked at her not as a captive or an enemy, but as an equal. "Then you are one of us," he said quietly. From that night on, she was no longer Evelyn Vance. She was called Ashen, named after what she left behind. And when Josiah clasped her burned hand, sealing the vow between them, the others did not know whether to fear the bond or follow it. They left Revolt before dawn, following the river north through the mist. Smoke still curled behind them, a dying ghost of the world they had destroyed. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and ash. 51 souls moved through the forest in silence, carrying only what they could salvage: tools, rags, seeds, and memory. Josiah led them barefoot, blood still drying on his palm. Ashen walked behind him, her once white gown torn and streaked with soot, her face unreadable. No one spoke to her. To most, she was still the daughter of the man who'd kept them in chains. But Josiah had made his choice, and that choice carried power. They walked for 3 days, sleeping in ravines, drinking from muddy streams, until they reached a place so deep in the woods that even the sound of birds vanished. A sunken hollow surrounded by ancient oaks, roots twisting like fingers into the earth. There was no path in, no path out, only shadow and stillness. Josiah stood at the center and said, "This is where we begin again." They built their first shelter from fallen branches and scraps of cloth. They dug a fire pit, shaped clay from the riverbank, and raised a wall of thorns around the perimeter. It was crude, but it was theirs. At night, when the others slept, Josiah sat by the fire writing with charcoal on scraps of parchment he'd saved from the plantation library. He was building something greater than survival, a doctrine, a map for generations that might never know him. Ashen sat across from him, silent. The firelight carved sharp edges into her face. "You could leave," he said one night. "Find the soldiers, tell them what happened." She shook her head slowly. "And say what?" "That my father's slaves killed him because he deserved it. They'd hang me beside you." He looked at her for a long time, the silence between them heavy with the strange electricity of two people who should have been enemies but were bound by something far more dangerous. Truth. In time, the people began to call their refuge the Hollow. Not for what it lacked, but for what it held: a heartbeat beneath the soil, a secret waiting to grow. And as Josiah looked at the circle of faces lit by firelight, he said softly, "We are not fugitives. We are founders." A week's passed, and the Hollow became more than a refuge. It became a world reborn from ruin. The air was thick with the scent of pine and smoke. Tents became cabins, whispers became lessons, and fear slowly turned into rhythm. The people of Revolt, once bound by chains, now moved with purpose. They built, they hunted, they sang, and at the center of it all stood Josiah, the man who had turned vengeance into vision. Every evening, the camp gathered around the central fire. That's where Josiah began to teach. Not sermons, not orders, principles. He called them the 13 laws of the Hollow. "Law 1, he said, voice deep and steady. "Every man and woman owns their labor, their name, and their breath." Law 2, "No child shall be born in chains, nor taught to bow." Law 3, "The world above may call us criminals. Let them. We will not answer to names given by tyrants." Each law was repeated by the people, their voices echoing through the forest until the night seemed to hum with defiance. They etched the words into bark, whispered them into their children's ears, carved them into memory. Ashen watched from the circle's edge. She had started to work beside the others, gathering herbs, tending fires, patching torn clothes. The people still looked at her with suspicion, but they could not deny her hands bled like theirs did. And when a fever swept through the camp, it was Ashen who stayed awake for 3 nights, grinding willow bark and saving lives. One evening, after the sickness had passed, Josiah found her by the river washing the blood from her sleeves. "You've earned their trust," he said quietly. She glanced at him. "No," she murmured. "I've earned their questions." He smiled faintly. "That's where trust begins." They stood there in the half-dark, the water reflecting embers from distant fires. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't made of tension. It was understanding. That night, when Josiah spoke to the people again, he looked toward her before beginning. "Law 13, he said, voice carrying into the trees. "No bloodline defines worth. No birth defines belonging." And for the first time, Ashen lifted her chin and said the words aloud with the rest. The hollow was no longer just his creation, it was theirs. By the 3rd month, whispers began to seep through the forest like smoke. Traders passing nearby, hunters straying too far, even neighboring plantation overseers murmured rumors of Reddle's survivors. Some spoke of fire, some of rebellion, some of a man who had killed his master and led the enslaved into the woods. No one knew the full story, and that uncertainty made the whispers more dangerous. Josiah heard them first, standing at the edge of the hollow, the trees pressing in like silent sentinels. The people looked to him, waiting for guidance. He did not panic. Fear was a tool he had discarded long before Reddle burned. "They are coming," he said quietly. "Not yet, but they will. We must be ready." That night around the fire, he gathered them all again. Ashen sat at his side, her hand brushing against his, both a comfort and a warning. "We have names now. We have laws. We have strength. But the world beyond these woods will test us. You must remember, courage without preparation is death. Discipline without heart is tyranny." He began teaching strategies he had learned in secret. How to read tracks, how to set traps, how to move silently through the forest. Every day, the hollow became less a refuge and more a fortress. The people took part in rituals to seal their identities, repeating phrases twice. Rituals Josiah insisted upon to bind loyalty, courage, and memory. "The fire remembers. The fire remembers." It was whispered in the comments of their nightly circle, a symbolic oath that even the timid could repeat to steel themselves. And yet, despite the preparation, there was tension. Some of the newly freed questioned Josiah's methods. Some doubted Ashen's place among them. But every night, when Josiah and Ashen walked the perimeter together, their presence reminded everyone that rebellion had a face, and that face was steady, unflinching, unstoppable. In the distance, the first signs of pursuers appeared, smoke from another fire, distant hoofbeats carried faintly by the wind. Josiah didn't flinch. He drew a deep breath and spoke to the hollow as if it were a living being. "Tonight, we remind the world why chains exist only where fear resides. Tonight, we show them we are not afraid." And in that moment, the hollow shifted from sanctuary to arena, a place where the first battle for freedom would be etched in blood and memory. The hoofbeats came at dusk, muffled by the thick forest floor but unmistakable. Josiah stood at the edge of the hollow, listening, eyes narrowing. 52 hearts thumped in rhythm with his own. Ashen moved silently beside him, her fingers brushing the hilt of a dagger she had claimed from Reddle. The hunters appeared as silhouettes against the dying light. 3 men, armed, confident, convinced that fear would secure victory. They did not know the hollow. They did not know the people within it. Josiah raised a hand. The people froze. Not in terror, but in anticipation. "Remember," he whispered, "we are not running. We are not pleading. We are law." A signal passed silently through the group, hands snapping twice. A ritual Josiah had drilled them in, a recognition of the bond they had forged with blood and fire. The hunters stepped closer, calling out names, threats, promises of reward. But the response was silence. Only shadows moved. Then Josiah struck from behind the trees. Arrows flew, not wildly, but with purpose, striking the horses first. The hunters reeled, cursing, their mounts collapsing in agony. Smoke from hidden fires coiled through the underbrush, disorienting them. The hollow had become an unseen force, not just a place. One hunter lunged toward the camp, but a trap snapped around his legs, sending him sprawling. Josiah emerged from the shadows, his knife gleaming, his calm as terrifying as the forest itself. "You are trespassing on law that does not answer to your king," he said. "Step back, or step into judgment." The hunters hesitated, but hesitation meant nothing. The people of the hollow advanced, a unified wave, not in frenzy but in calculated resolve. Ashen moved with Josiah, a phantom at his side, her dagger precise, her gaze unwavering. When it was over, 2 hunters lay unconscious, tied to trees, their horses fled into the woods. The third staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, and Josiah let him flee. "Tell the world what happens here," he said quietly. "It will remember." The hollow exhaled. No one celebrated, no one laughed. But the lesson had been delivered. The fire remembers. The fire remembers. The people repeated the phrase twice as taught, sealing the night into their souls. In that instant, Evelyn, ashen now fully, realized the magnitude of what they had become. Not fugitives, not rebels. They were a reckoning. Dawn arrived over the hollow like a quiet promise. Smoke still curled from the traps set for the hunters, the air thick with iron and ash, but the people moved with purpose, tending wounds, repairing barriers, and planting seeds that would feed them for months to come. Josiah stood at the center, watching, noting who worked well together, who hesitated, who carried the weight of fear too visibly. "We are not a village. We are a covenant," he said, voice carrying over the early light. "Every choice we make here defines us. Every action writes our law." Ashen approached him, her boots leaving prints in the soft soil. "They look to you," she said softly, some with hope, some with doubt. Josiah's gaze met hers. "They look to the future. And you? Do you trust it?" Her lips pressed together, eyes hardening. "I trust the fire." That morning, as the people worked, word reached the hollow through travelers and messengers. Other escaped slaves were seeking refuge. Men and women who had fled from plantations miles away, drawn by rumor of a place where chains could no longer bind. Josiah listened, heart steady, knowing that every arrival strengthened them, but also brought risk. "They come," he said to the group that had formed around the fire, "and we will teach them, bind them, give them names and laws. But understand this, our strength is measured by our unity. Any weakness, any division, and the world will devour us." Ashen watched as he walked among them, speaking to each new face, reading the nervous glances, the wary stances. She realized the bond they had formed in blood and ritual was contagious. The people began to look at her differently, not just as the daughter of a colonel, not just as a witness, but as one of them, a symbol of transformation, of courage in the face of the impossible. By nightfall, the hollow had doubled in size. Fires dotted the clearing, and the people repeated the ritual phrases twice, reinforcing their unity, locking the truth into themselves. "The fire remembers, the fire remembers." Josiah and Ashen stood together at the edge, watching the flames. No words were spoken, but a silent understanding passed between them. The hollow was no longer just a place of survival. It was a movement, a seed of revolt, a living declaration that slavery's chains could be shattered. "We have begun," Josiah murmured, "and we will not end until the world sees what we are." He turned to her, eyes dark with intent. "Are you with me? Until the last chain is broken," Ashen whispered. Word traveled through the forests faster than the wind. Survivors from distant plantations, beaten, hunted, desperate, began finding their way to the hollow. Josiah met each one personally, reading their eyes for fear, defiance, cunning, and loyalty. Every new arrival was a risk, a spark that could ignite betrayal or strengthen their fire. "Trust is earned, not given," he told the gathered group around the central fire. "We do not take strangers lightly, but we also do not turn away those who seek the flame." Ashen moved beside him, observing. Some of the newcomers flinched at her presence, their minds still clouded by years of conditioning. But she did not flinch. Every gesture, every word she offered, reminded them that the hollow was a place where courage mattered more than bloodlines, where loyalty was forged in acts, not inherited status. Josiah divided the newcomers into groups, pairing them with those already seasoned in the rituals, teaching them the language of the hollow, the names, the laws, the oaths. Every lesson repeated twice as he instructed, so the knowledge would sink into bone and blubber. The fire remembers. The fire remembers. A week passed, and the hollow's walls of secrecy grew stronger. Scouts were sent beyond the forest edge, quietly observing nearby plantations, listening for signs of hunters or informants. Rumors of the fire spread, some whispered of ghosts, others of a cursed rebellion led by a man who had slain his master. Fear became a shield, legend became armor. But even as alliances grew, tension simmered. New arrivals tested boundaries, old resentments flared, whispers of doubt rippled through the community. Josiah knew that without discipline, the hollow could collapse from within faster than any external threat could destroy it. One night, he called a council of the elders, including Ashen. "Power without guidance is chaos," he said. "We are not merely surviving, we are building a system, a sanctuary, a force. Each of you is a guardian, a teacher, a judge. Remember that. Remember the fire." Ashen, standing in the firelight, felt the weight of her own transformation. No longer the daughter of privilege, no longer a witness. She was a pillar of the hollow. And as Josiah looked toward the shadows beyond the trees, he whispered to no one in particular, "The world will try to burn us out. But every spark we nurture here, every bond we forge, every law we etch into the earth, will rise from the ashes stronger than before." The morning air was thick with tension. Smoke from distant fires carried the acrid scent of fear, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Josiah stood atop the ridge overlooking the hollow, eyes scanning the tree line. Dozens of figures moved cautiously, weapons in hand, slave catchers, mercenaries, men who believed fear would bend the will of the free. But the hollow had become something they could not anticipate, a living, breathing trap, built from patience, knowledge, and blood. "Remember," Josiah said to those gathered at the center fire, "we are not hiding, we are present, we are law. Every move they make will be met with purpose, not panic." Ashen, her face streaked with ash and sweat, knelt beside him, checking the stock of arrows and sharpening blades. Every resident of the hollow, from the youngest teen to the oldest survivor, had a role. The forest itself had been mapped, every route, ditch, and hollow a strategic advantage. The attackers advanced slowly, thinking the hollow would be easy prey. They underestimated the traps laid weeks ago, camouflaged pits, snares, and barricades that funneled intruders into predictable paths. The first hunter fell silently into a pit. The second's horse bolted at a hidden flare. Panic rippled among them. "The fire remembers. The fire remembers." The people of the hollow whispered twice, moving through the shadows, appearing where the enemy least expected. Josiah led a small contingent through a concealed path, emerging behind the attackers. Quick, precise strikes immobilized their weapons and scattered their formations. Ashen moved alongside him, dagger flashing, her calm efficiency terrifying to those who had spent years thinking they held power. By midday, the attackers were in chaos. Many fled, tripping over traps or running into the hollow itself, where the freed moved like phantoms, striking with purpose and disappearing. Not a single hollow resident was seriously injured. When the battle ended, Josiah gathered his people, bloodied hands pressed to the earth, eyes scanning the horizon. "Let this be a warning," he said quietly, voice low but resonant. "Freedom is defended with more than hope. It is defended with knowledge, courage, and the will to act. Every attack they plan, we will anticipate. Every threat we will endure. And every time they come, the fire will remember." Ashen watched him, understanding fully now that the hollow was not merely a sanctuary. It was a movement, a living testament that those who had been broken could rise, not just to survive, but to defy the world itself. News of the hollow traveled faster than any horse could carry it. Traders, escaped slaves, and sympathetic travelers whispered of a forested refuge, where the enslaved had killed their oppressors, burned their chains, and built a settlement governed by laws of freedom. In towns along the edges of Alabama, whispers became rumors, rumors became fear. Plantation owners whispered of Josiah as though he were a specter, an unstoppable force moving through the shadows, invisible yet omnipresent. Inside the hollow, the people felt the pulse of their growing legend. New faces appeared at the edge of the forest, Men and women who had risked everything to reach this sanctuary. Each arrival was a story of pain, defiance, and endurance, a thread woven into the tapestry Josiah was creating. "Every life here strengthens us," Josiah said during an evening council. "But remember, with strength comes responsibility. Every newcomer tests our unity, every choice echoes through the hollow." Ashen moved among the arrivals, listening to their stories, guiding them into the rituals. She repeated the phrases twice as Josiah had taught, ensuring the newcomers internalized the hollow's core truth. The fire remembers. The fire remembers. By the first full moon of their second year, the hollow had transformed from a hidden refuge into a thriving settlement. Gardens and fields flourished, children played without fear, and the people who had once walked with bowed heads now moved with upright shoulders and eyes bright with self-determination. But the outside world did not forget. Plantation owners sent spies, bounty hunters, and emissaries hoping to infiltrate or destroy the hollow. Josiah anticipated every move. He organized patrols, trained scouts, and created false trails that led pursuers away from the heart of their sanctuary. Every intrusion became a lesson in vigilance, every threat a demonstration of their resolve. One evening, as Josiah and Ashen walked along the river that bordered their land, he spoke quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. "They think fear will control us. They think chains can be rebuilt with threats. But every act they commit against us only binds us closer, for our law is forged not by them, but by us." Ashen nodded, her hand brushing his. They understood now that the hollow was more than a place. It was a declaration, a living challenge to the world's hierarchy. Every soul within it carried a spark of defiance, every heartbeat a rhythm of rebellion. And as the moon rose high over the hollow, Josiah whispered to her, "Soon, the world will know our names, not as slaves, not as fugitives, but as the architects of freedom." The whispers that once traveled only through the shadows now took shape in daylight, carried by fear and outrage. Neighboring plantation owners, alarmed by the growing legend of the hollow, convened in secret. They spoke in hushed tones of Josiah, the man who had killed his master, forged a sanctuary, and trained the formerly enslaved into something the world could no longer ignore. Threats were made, rewards offered, alliances formed. Every planter within a 50-mile radius pledged manpower, weapons, and cunning to destroy the hollow and erase its memory. Josiah learned of this gathering through a network of scouts, travelers, and sympathetic traders. He did not panic. Instead, he called a council in the central fire circle, where men and women, old and young, now listened with respect and unflinching attention. Ashen stood beside him, her presence a reminder that the hollow's strength had grown from unity, courage, and shared purpose. "They will come with guns and horses," Josiah said quietly, voice low but cutting through the murmurs. "They will bring the world's fear. But remember, we are the law here, we are the fire, and every move they make we have anticipated." He assigned rowless scouts to track enemy movement, hunters to secure food and resources, defenders to guard the perimeter. Every corner of the hollow became a calculated position, every tree and ravine a potential advantage. Josiah taught them to anticipate not only the physical assault but the psychological one, intimidation, bribery, and deception from the outside world. Ashen moved among the people, reinforcing the oath, "The fire remembers, the fire remembers." Twice she repeated it, embedding it into every heart. The ritual became more than a mantra, it became an identity, a shield against doubt. That night, as the moon rose over the trees, the first signs of the approaching coalition appeared. Campfires flickering on distant ridges, hoofbeats faint but steady, men shouting in the dark, unaware that the hollow was already awake, already watching. Josiah studied the horizon, calculating every possibility, every weakness in their lines. "Tonight they think they have the advantage," he whispered to Ashen, who stood at his side. "Tomorrow they will learn the cost of underestimating what we have built." In the hollow there was no fear, only preparation. Every heartbeat, every whispered word, every glance shared across the fire reinforced a singular truth: they were no longer fugitives. They were architects of a revolution, and the world had yet to see its fury. The first assault came at dawn, low clouds masking the sun as the coalition advanced. Horses thundered through the clearing, axes glinting in muted light, men shouting names and threats. Josiah stood at the edge of the ridge, Ashen beside him, their hands brushing as the wind carried the scent of pine and smoke. "Remember who we are," Josiah whispered, voice low but steady. "We are not hiding, we are law. We are fire." The people of the hollow moved like shadows, slipping silently through the trees, taking positions they had memorized for months. Every trap, every pit, every hidden barricade waited for the intruders. The coalition thought they could crush fear with force, but fear was the only weapon the hollow had left behind. As the first group of hunters fell into pits, screaming and cursing, Josiah signaled with a silent hand. Arrows rained from concealed branches, horses bolted, and confusion erupted. Ashen moved alongside him, dagger flashing in the dim light, cutting a path of precision and efficiency. They were no longer fugitives, they were orchestrators of a calculated symphony of rebellion. The battle raged for hours, the coalition's forces repeatedly stymied by traps and tactics they could not anticipate. Every hollow resident knew their role, every move was synchronized, almost ritualistic. Josiah, walking among them, whispered encouragement, instilling not just courage but a sense of destiny. And amidst the chaos, the people repeated their binding words twice, a mantra of identity and strength. "The fire remembers. The fire remembers." It echoed through the forest like a drumbeat of defiance, uniting every heartbeat in rhythm with the hollow itself. By nightfall, the coalition had been repelled. Horses were lost, supplies destroyed, and their leaders humiliated. Josiah allowed some to escape as living warnings. The hollow was no longer a secret, they were a legend, terrifying to those who sought to control them. Later, as the flames from the fires reflected in their eyes, Ashen and Josiah stood together, leaning close, sharing the quiet intimacy that only shared danger could forge. "Why have survived?" she whispered. "We have risen," he replied, "and the world will remember us. But we cannot stop here. This is only the beginning." And as the first light of a new day touched the forest floor, the hollow pulsed with life, strength, and defiance. The morning after the battle was quiet, almost eerily so. The hollow breathed as one entity, wounded but undefeated. Josiah walked among the people, observing the small victories and the hidden fears. They had fought and survived, but survival alone was not enough. To remain free, the hollow required structure, laws, and a shared vision, something stronger than impulse, stronger than rage. "Freedom without rules," Josiah said, voice low and commanding, "is chaos. And chaos will destroy us faster than any hunter or militia ever could." Ashen followed closely, her presence a constant reminder of what had been sacrificed to reach this point and what had been gained. Together they gathered the elders, the skilled, and the wise among them. The council would determine how the hollow operated, disputes settled, resources shared, and responsibilities assigned. The laws were simple but unyielding. Every voice mattered, but every action carried weight. No one could hoard, no one could harm the innocent, and every decision must serve the good of the hollow. Josiah's handwriting, precise and deliberate, marked the first codex. Ashen contributed her knowledge of strategy, negotiation, and logistics. "We are not merely surviving," he said, looking each person in the eye. "We are building a society, and a society must have rules. We enforce them not with fear, but with consequence and fairness." The scouts reported additional threats on the horizon. Planters consolidating their resources, mercenaries moving in tighter formations, whispers of betrayal. Josiah knew that to maintain freedom, the hollow had to grow stronger, smarter, faster. They could not simply react, they had to anticipate, to control the narrative, to forge alliances beyond the forest. Ashen gathered the younger fighters, teaching them the rituals, the repeated words, the vigilance, the courage of community. Twice she repeated the mantra for them: "The fire remembers, the fire remembers." It became a binding identity, a shield against doubt, fear, and hesitation. Every child, every new arrival, every veteran of the first siege understood that they were now part of something eternal. By the end of the day, the hollow was no longer just a physical sanctuary. It was a symbol of resistance, a fortress of law, and a seed of rebellion that would stretch far beyond the trees. Josiah watched the sun dip behind the ridge, knowing that their greatest challenges were yet to come, but also that they were ready. "We are the fire," he whispered to Ashen, "and the world will never burn us out." The Hollow thrived, but even in the sanctuary of freedom, shadows lingered. The past could not be fully erased, and fear, betrayal, and doubt were still powerful forces. One evening, a new arrival stumbled into the central fire circle, frantic, eyes wide, whispering of a traitor among them, a man who'd been recruited by the coalition, offering knowledge in exchange for freedom elsewhere. Josiah's face hardened. He had anticipated threats from outside, but internal betrayal carried a deeper poison. The Hollow had been built on trust, discipline, and unity, and now that unity was tested, every person here chose freedom. Josiah said, voice low but penetrating, but freedom comes with responsibility. Betrayal is the only sin that cannot be forgiven. He called a council at once. Ashen stood beside him, her hands clenched, her gaze scanning every face. The accused was brought forward, trembling, pleading innocence, yet evidence was undeniable. Spies, notes, and testimony all pointed to collusion. Josiah's eyes did not waver. This is the crucible, he told the council. Every choice we make, every action we take, defines whether the Hollow survives. We must act decisively, but justly. A trial was convened, not in haste, but with meticulous care. Witnesses spoke, testimonies repeated, twice reinforcing the truth. The fire remembers. The fire remembers. The mantra was not just ritual, it was law. It bound them to clarity, to purpose, to the reality that betrayal could extinguish what they had fought so hard to create. The accused was stripped of privileges, exiled to the edges of the Hollow under strict supervision, and assigned tasks that ensured survival but eliminated influence. Even as the community absorbed this lesson, Josiah understood that fear and tension would linger. Shadows within were harder to predict than hunters outside. And yet, this trial strengthened the Hollow. Its laws were living, its consequences real, its unity proven. Ashen approached Josiah later, watching the fire's reflection in his eyes. "It's not enough to survive the world outside," she said quietly. "We must survive ourselves." Josiah nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, and every day, every choice, every breath must remind us who we are. We are the Hollow. We are the fire, and the world will learn that the chains they forged cannot touch us here." Outside, the forest stirred, as if acknowledging the covenant of those within. The Hollow had faced its first true internal test, and emerged stronger, more disciplined, more alive than ever. The Hollow could no longer remain an isolated sanctuary. Word of their defiance had spread like wildfire, drawing both admirers and enemies. Josiah understood that survival required connection, not just defense. He began to send envoys to nearby sympathetic communities, free black settlements, clandestine networks of abolitionists, even those white farmers who quietly despised the tyranny of the plantations. Every contact was deliberate, every message coded, every meeting a risk. Isolation is safety only for the timid, Josiah told Ashen as they prepared a small caravan of scouts and emissaries. We must extend our influence, we must forge alliances, and we must be careful. Our enemies watch the skies, the rivers, the roads. Ashen oversaw the selection of the people to go. They were observant, loyal, disciplined, capable of navigating the outside world without revealing the Hollow's heart. Twice she repeated the mantra with them before departure. The fire remembers. The fire remembers. The emissaries moved like shadows, slipping through towns, delivering messages and gathering intelligence. Some returned with food, others with news of planned attacks, and some with recruits willing to risk everything for a chance at freedom. Each journey tested nerves and morality, as spies and informants tried to turn loyalty into betrayal. Back in the Hollow, Josiah strengthened governance, refining laws, codifying responsibilities, and training a militia capable of defending not only the settlement but its influence in the region. Fields expanded, communal projects flourished, and even in the face of growing external pressure, the Hollow operated with a disciplined elegance. But the political threat grew. Plantation owners in neighboring counties began petitioning local militias and sheriffs to investigate the Hollow. Legal claims were filed, bounty posters circulated, and whispers of mercenary forces reached Josiah's ears. The Hollow had become a symbol, and symbols demanded attention, often violent. "We are not merely defending land," Josiah said during council. "We are defending ideas, freedom, law, and the right to exist beyond oppression. And ideas cannot be crushed with gunpowder alone. Ashen, watching him, understood that their fight had grown beyond survival. It was now a revolution of influence, vision, and psychological warfare. Every law enforced, every recruit trained, every connection made extended the reach of the Hollow. The first emissaries returned one night, bringing news of a coalition forming beyond their immediate borders. A network of allies who could, if united, challenge the forces gathering against them. Josiah listened, eyes dark with calculation, realizing that the Hollow's next move would determine not just their survival, but the survival of the idea of freedom itself. The coalition had grown bolder. Reports arrived of armed patrols moving closer, of mercenaries hired to track the Hollow's boundaries, of informants embedded in neighboring communities. The Hollow was no longer a hidden refuge. It was a symbol that terrified the old order, and symbols demand eradication. Josiah called the council at the central fire. Faces illuminated by flickering flames, the people of the Hollow listened intently. Every man, woman, and child now understood that survival alone was not enough. They were the architects of a new world, and that world was under siege. They believe fear can control us, Josiah said, voice cutting through the night. They think numbers and guns will dictate reality, but we have something they cannot understand: unity, purpose, and the knowledge that freedom is not negotiable. Ashen moved among the council members, ensuring readiness. Twice she repeated the mantra to reinforce their collective identity. The fire remembers. The fire remembers. The scouts reported that the coalition would converge from 3 directions, hoping to overwhelm the Hollow through sheer force. Josiah's plan was precise ambushes, traps, misinformation, and a network of decoys to fragment and confuse the attackers. Each fighter understood their role. Hesitation was deadly. Every action became ritualized, a dance of strategy honed over months of preparation. The first skirmish erupted at dawn. Trees shivered under the weight of arrows, the ground shook with hoofbeats, and the Hollow responded as one organism. Every trap, every signal, every strike had been rehearsed. The coalition underestimated the knowledge, discipline, and sheer audacity of the Hollow's people. By midday, the attackers were scattered, some retreating, others captured and detained within the Hollow. Josiah ensured that no unnecessary blood was spilled. Justice was deliberate, consequences instructive. The battle was not only physical but psychological. The coalition learned that terror and intimidation could not control a people who understood their own power. That night, as the survivors gathered around the fire, Ashen approached Josiah. Her voice was calm but full of intensity. "We've held them off again. But this is only the beginning. They will return stronger, with more numbers and more hate." Josiah nodded, his eyes reflecting the flames, his mind already calculating the next move. "Yes," he whispered. "And when they come again, they will not find a mere settlement. They will find a people who have become legend. They will find fire, and fire cannot be extinguished." The aftermath of the final skirmish left the Hollow scarred but undefeated. Smoke still rose from the battlefields, yet the people moved with purpose, tending to wounds, rebuilding structures, and reinforcing defenses. Josiah walked among them, his presence both a guide and a symbol. Each pair of eyes that met his understood the truth: freedom had a price, and they had paid it in full. Ashen approached, carrying water for the fighters, her hands steady despite the fatigue etched across her face. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had endured. The planning, the betrayals, the victories, and the near-death moments that had shaped them into more than a community. Twice she repeated the mantra, embedding it into every heart that listened. "The fire remembers. The fire remembers. We've become more than a settlement," Josiah said, his voice low but resonant. "We are a living testament to what courage, strategy, and unity can achieve. The world may try to erase us, but no paper, no law, no threat can erase what we have built here." In a ceremony both private and public, Josiah and Ashen were married, a union that symbolized more than love. It represented the fusion of vision, leadership, and rebellion. The people of the Hollow celebrated not just the bond of 2 individuals, but the consolidation of a society founded on equality, law, and defiance. Every witness understood the power of the moment. The man who had slain a master and the woman who had chosen freedom over lineage had now cemented a new order. Josiah spoke to the gathered crowd, his words deliberate, hypnotic, and eternal. We are the architects of our own destiny. Every decision, every act of courage, every sacrifice has brought us here. From this day forward, the Hollow stands as proof that freedom is not granted. It is seized, defended, and remembered. The Hollow flourished in the years that followed. Children were taught literacy, strategy, and law. Adults cultivated the land with ownership and pride. Outsiders approached with caution, respect, or fear, but none could dominate. Josiah's network of alliances expanded, spreading the philosophy of the Hollow into neighboring counties, creating a ripple of defiance that could not be silenced. And as the sun set over the ridges, the fire in the central circle burned brighter than ever. It was a fire that held memory, justice, and revolution. It was a fire that whispered to anyone who dared to listen, "The fire remembers. The fire remembers." Josiah Ashen and the people of the Hollow had not just survived. They had rewritten history, creating a legacy that would echo through generations. And for anyone who dares to seek the truth of forbidden freedom, the story of the Hollow remains a chilling, hypnotic testament: one man's courage, one woman's choice, and the unquenchable fire of resistance. If this story has gripped you, subscribe, comment your location, and carry this truth with you. The Hollow waits eternal, and the fire remembers.